Joe, are you listening?
I am listening, Justin.
I was disappointed that they didn't actually talk about what they thought in more details, but they thought the significant dramatic increase in cases was today.
Yeah, the tests are way up. 20,000 tests is going to go up anyways. But
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah.
But the positivity rate of those tests was what, I forget now, but it was high.
Yeah, well, it was 4.7, but as you know, we cut it, you and I have been cutting it in half.
Well, that's 4.7 of all, but that there's the first time takers. And that number's been pushing 20%, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was disappointed. I would have appreciated a little more detail.
And they didn't give any more detail in either of the league call or the governor's conference later, the telephone conference that we had with the staff. Not a lot more detail, other than the confusion of it.
Yeah, that was a great presentation by the doctor who's going to run the.
Yes, I think so.
I agree, Justin. It was interesting to hear her speak. I had not heard a emergency room doctor really speak in depth like that about it.
Yeah, we're live, by the way. We're being recorded.
All right.
It's all right.
Haven't said anything bad yet.
True. We could have got there.
No, not me.
Well, I could have.
Chris walked back in to make sure that we're all keeping us in line. So it's 5:30. I think that we have most everyone on, so we can get started. I just want to introduce Jacques Alfonso and Brian Schuster from National Grid. They will be presenting the brief today, and I think that Tom already has it so that he can share on the screen for them to present. Thank you for coming, Jacques and Brian. I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to us.
No, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity, and just bear with me a moment while I hopefully do this correctly and share my screen. And hopefully you all can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. All right. So good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share really what we've been discussing with a variety of different stakeholders for a few months now. And that's the long-term kind of energy outlook and opportunity for a long-term enduring solution for Aquidneck Island. We came out with a study at the beginning of September, and since then we've been pretty fast and furious and engaging with different stakeholders. And really, it's important that we share this information because we really don't have a path yet picked, if you will, of what option to pursue. And so for those of you who have already seen, I know Joe has seen the study. Hopefully some of you have checked out our webpage and reviewed this study that we did. And some of this is going to just be refresh, or I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. But at the end of this, I can't pitch strong enough that we're looking for the voice of the community. We're looking for your feedback, your input on what you believe would be the best, most enduring path forward for the island. So I'm going to cover the kind of the options that we've put out in our study. I probably have about 15 slides here. It'll take me maybe 20 to 30 minutes to cover the slides, and then we'll open it up for questions that you might have. So before we kind of get into the study, I do want to just talk a little bit about our winter operations out at Old Mill Lane in Portsmouth, our temporary LNG facility. We have had quite a bit of discussions with different stakeholders regarding the operation of our facility out there. And as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of concern and opposition from the residents around Old Mill Lane in Portsmouth. I'm not sure how much of that discussion will be needed tonight, since you know, the vicinity is a little further for you all in Newport. But I'm happy to address questions. But just to give paint a little picture of what the operation is, you know, we're standing this temporary LNG facility up for the winter. We stood it up last winter. As you'll see in a few slides from now, I'll talk a little bit more about why we need the site. But the site does entail the mobilization of some LNG tanker trucks that will be staged on our property off Old Mill Lane. And they basically stand by for the winter as a contingency for any either capacity constraints that we might face or vulnerability, excuse me, to the transmission supply that we receive to the island. So this is a backup, if you will, for preventing such an occurrence that we experienced, as you all well know, back in January 2019 with the loss of pressure. Some of the conditions have changed, which have further promoted the use for this site overall. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just so you know, we are in the process of standing that set up as we speak for this upcoming winter. Here's a little timeline, if you will, of the overall timeline. Basically, we'll have the site operational by December 1st. And just a footnote, you know, the site was stood up last winter as well. It was not needed. We never operated at all last winter, but naturally, due to the you know, concerns about just having that contingency, we are going to continue to operate this facility until we've determined kind of the long-term enduring solution, which really gets into the kind of premise and the main points of the study. So with that, let me just jump into kind of let me see. Hopefully I'm not sure how well you all can see this, but let me go to full screen here on my page anyways. Okay. Can everybody see the full screen okay on my screen, N10, hopefully?
I have a full screen, Brian. Yeah,
okay.
Everyone
Okay, good. All right, good. So let me talk a little bit about what the condition we're in right now for the entire island. So as most of you know, the entire island is fed by one transmission gas supply line. The Algonquin transmission pipe comes into the island in Portsmouth, right next to our Old Mill Lane temporary LNG site. That's what we call our take station. That's one 6-inch pipe that comes into the island. And after the gas outage event in January 2019, Enbridge, the transmission pipe operator, had changed some of the operating conditions of which we used to be able to operate under. And in short terms, we used to be able to take well enough adequate supply or enough gas from that supply that we didn't really have any gas capacity constraints per our given design day. And a design day for us is, you know, the coldest day of the year, if you will, in a 60-year time frame that could be experienced. And that's, you know, in the negative digits of a cold day that would last with preceding days of that sort of temperature. And that's our design day. We design what the gas demand could be in that scenario. When what has happened with the operating, I'll call it controls that Enbridge has put on to that take station, is we are now, as soon as they change that operating condition, we are now facing a situation where we could have a capacity draw that's greater than the demand that pipe can supply. And you'll see this in a graph that I show in the next slide here. But the second kind of challenge that we have, so the first challenge is a gas capacity constraint. The second challenge is the very scenario that happened in January 2019. If there was a supply transmission issue of whatever cause that would be, you know, an interruption to the transmission supply overall, the vulnerability of having just one pipe provide that is the other challenge that we face. And overall, you know, that's that's why we now have a contingency scenario set up at Old Mill Lane with the temporary LNG. So if I go to this slide, you can kind of see this kind of paints the picture of where we stand. And what you can see this for this winter, peak gas demand forecasted in our design day is this kind of green box that you see here. And this yellow dotted line, this is the total gas pipeline capacity. This is what comes off the transmission pipeline. So you can see there's just amount that if you hit a really cold winter and you had that negative temperatures for days, you could see a draw above what the pipeline could supply. And obviously with economic development and growth on the island, the prediction by 2035 is obviously that demand is going to increase. And so we have a growing problem with capacity. With the temporary LNG in place, we jump up to this kind of pinkish purple line. That's the capacity we have with the pipeline plus the LNG capacity overall. And I will say the LNG capacity alone, this huge gap, could cover independently the entire island on most typical winters on itself. You know, down to 35-degree average temperature. If we completely lost the transmission pipeline, we could continue to operate supply uninterrupted to our customers across Aquidneck Island with the temporary LNG facility that we currently have at Old Mill Lane. So that just kind of paints you a picture overall of the condition that we're facing right now and why we have the need for temporary LNG over at Old Mill Lane. So, and this is just kind of telling you overall, again, highlighting the use of the facility and so forth. Now, I want to be very clear, and it's you probably heard there's a huge resistance from our operation there at Old Mill Lane, and frankly, one of our guardrails in our overall objectives as we move into kind of the solutions that we're going to present tonight here and that are in our study. You know, we don't want to have to operate at Old Mill Lane. We prefer not to have to use that facility. It is literally right in a residential neighborhood, and there are folks that live right across the street from the site. And it's, you know, the lighting that we have for security reasons are bright at night. You know, there's noise with the trucks coming in and out when we operate. If we had to vaporize into the system, there are noises, and there are other operational elements around the site that just make it a concerning operation for all of the residents nearby. So some of you may know we are also in the process of getting a clarification from the Energy Facilities Siting Board about the site. When we first knew we were going to use the site last winter, we went to the EFSB about clarification, and they just gave us a 2-year waiver to operate the facility because it wasn't known if that sort of site would fall under the premise of a major energy facility, which is really what the EFSB is focused around, you know, the siting, construction, alteration of major energy facilities. So they gave us a 2-year waiver and said, come back with, where you feel, National Grid, this falls under as far as regulatory oversight. And I'll just state that, you know, we have made a petition that we don't believe temporary operations such as this do need EFSB oversight. And again, that's because it's temporarily. The permitting, the siting requirements for these types of major energy facilities can take 1 to 2 years to go through that process. And obviously, this is a site we're standing up in short order, running for the winter. We're taking it down each winter. And frankly, we'd want to mobilize if there was an emergency without, you know, we wouldn't be able to go through the entire Energy Facility Siting Board approvals anyway for those kind of operations. So we are petitioning that for clarification purposes, as the FPS has requested us to do, that we don't believe it requires EFSB oversight. I will say that some people interpret that as we're trying to skirt some sort of safety oversight, which is absolutely not the case whatsoever. We still have to abide by all the safety regulations and authorities. We fall under the jurisdiction having authority is the Division of Public Utility and Carriers. So we get inspected by them. We have safety standards that we abide by them. And when we get inspected by them, by the way, it's both planned inspections and unannounced type of inspections and the like. So, and of course, all of our operations and the personnel and the security, there are several different regulatory approvals that we need to get to continue to operate those types of facilities. So I just wanted to kind of state that, as there's been a lot of questions about what's going on with the FSB process. I will say both Portsmouth and Middletown are intervening in that docket as we speak. You can certainly find more about the docket and the hearing schedule and so forth on the regulatory website. And I can provide further information that if anybody who does want specifics on that. But they are intervening, and more so just to ensure they believe that having EFSB oversight provides enhanced, again, security or safety. Excuse me, another phone going off here. Anyways, back to what we really are seeking, and what I'm hoping you all can provide is some insight on as far as a long-term solution for Aquidneck Island. So here we are. As we said earlier, we do not want to have to operate continuously forever out of Old Mill Lane with a temporary LNG site. So we conducted a very detailed study, and this study has been influenced and with other studies that the state has done. We want to make sure that we pursue decarbonization efforts. So we have interest in looking for decarbonization in alignment with the governor's state goals, with the renewable energy goals. We have our own net zero goals that we're seeking to achieve net zero by 2050. But more importantly, we want to make sure we have a safe and reliable solution going forward. So all the options that you're going to see tonight, we believe are safe. Certainly, we wouldn't even discuss them if they weren't safe. And we believe they provide that reliable, heating solution for an enduring future overall. Another key factor that you'll see weighed into our discussion is affordability. So when you look at all these factors, you got safety, reliability, affordability absolutely comes to the top as well, right? And especially in the times such as this with the pandemic, when people are struggling. So affordability is another key factor in the overall equation. And those are kind of guardrails that we put around our solutions. Keeping decarbonization optional, or a part of the discussion, looking at affordability, looking at reliability, ensuring it's safe, and then finally hoping we can provide an opportunity that gets us out of a temporary LNG setup at Old Mill Lane. So the solutions that we came to propose that are in our study, and we looked at a variety of options. I'm going to go through we're narrowing down to 4 that we think are the most responsible options and the most probable options. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these in a little more detail. The first option is a completely non-infrastructure solution. The second is looking at an alternate LNG solution. And again, I'll describe what these are as we go into each of them in a little more detail with following slides. The third is looking at another pipeline coming, another transmission project supplying the island, a second pipe, if you will. And then fourth is the kind of status quo option and frankly, as you'll see, it's the most affordable option, is just to continue to operate portable LNG out of Old Mill Lane. And again, that's not something we prefer to do, but we have to present it for equity purposes amongst all the other solutions, as it is a viable solution overall. I will say that all of these solutions incorporate continued focus on energy efficiency and demand response programs. So we'll continue to advocate for those. We'll continue to promote and drive those types of programs, and those are the, weatherization type programs, and our demand, that's energy efficiency and demand response programs we have for a few key customers on the island where we, incentivize them to reduce or stop using gas on the colder days of the year. And we call those certain demand days with those key customers, and they get, again, incentivized to reduce their demand overall. And unfortunately, that demand response program, it only really impacts the margins, if you will, because we just don't have enough big customers on the island. There are some though, so it does contribute. So overall, we want to keep building on to these solutions. So let me, the other keynote here, I'll just highlight, some of these solutions are, if we do pursue the option, they're going to take some time to construct or in some cases develop policy and incentive and create incentive programs and the like. And it's going to take, years for those to mature. So that means we're in the interim are absolutely going to be faced at continuing to operate at Old Mill Lane. And obviously that's disappointing news for some of the residents of Portsmouth and the abutting residents of Middletown, but we really don't have much of an option there. So regardless of what happens with the FSB process, which we are deemed to fall under the FSB for that site, which we are fine with, we're going to need to operate there, and I have a time scale that you'll see for the different solutions of how many years we project we'll still need to operate out of Old Mill Lane. So let's talk about each solution in a little more detail. The first is a non-infrastructure solution, and this is really looking at kind of that completely non-carbon type of opportunity, reducing demand overall by enhancing demand response programs and energy efficiency. But the biggest piece of this is heat electrification. So converting your heat use from gas over to electric heat pumps. Or electrically powered heat pumps, and their air source heat pumps, their ground source heat pumps, and the like. This option would be we don't have really, I'll call it a more formalized policy in place yet. In fact, electrifying gas heating customers would really require legislative action by the state. So this is why this type of option is going to take some time to develop and ramp up if this is the preferred approach forward. And the other challenge with this option is it's going to take quite a few years, and it's costly. Talking about the magnitude of types of heat electrification on the scale, we're talking about 9,000 customers on the island would need to convert over to heat pumps in order for it to make that meaningful difference in the overall demand. And that's basically 65% of our heating customers on the island right now. So it's a huge transition, if you will, to pursue this option. But it is certainly the most environmentally conscious option, and clearly our environmental advocates are completely in favor of this option. And again, it aligns with our decarbonization goals as well. So we'd be happy to pursue this as the premier option, taking into account that it's going to take some time and it's also going to come at a cost. And by the way, I do have some comparisons of the costs for each option in a further slide, just so you can get a little more a clear picture of the degree of cost we're talking about. The next option is a new LNG option, if you will. It gets us out of Old Mill Lane, but we have been working closely with the Navy, and the Navy has shown interest in collaborating with us on a potentially new LNG operation on a piece of Navy property. Now, I think a lot of you may know we do have a current lease on the Navy base for a peak shaving LNG operation. But that lease and that overall operating agreement does have a sunset. It's going to be terminating in 2026. And the operating agreement for that site doesn't allow us unrestricted 24/7 for 4 months of a year capability to run a temporary LNG operation. And that's why we're not, that's why we're not on the Navy base versus over at Old Mill Lane. We just don't have the means to do so in the fashion that we need to ensure a contingency 24/7 for the duration of the winter. But like I said, the Navy is working with us on another alternative, and that would be potentially locating a new type of injection point somewhere on Navy property. Now, and I'll just say, that there are Navy properties along Burma Road or Defense Highway. Those are the types of properties that we're looking at. And so they would be a little more, I'll say, remote from something like we have at Old Mill Lane, where it's right in the middle of the residential neighborhood. The acreage that we're looking at is much larger, and therefore it would still, or it would be a little less impactful from a sight and noise type of operation that some of our residents in Portsmouth currently don't like. But at the same time, it's on Navy property, so it comes with the security measures that the Navy requires. It's not accessible by the public and that sort of thing. So that's one option, is looking at either just a portable type of setup where we operate just like at Old Mill Lane, where we truck in and set up for the winter, or even potentially a permanent where we put some small storage. And you can see in the pictures on this slide, the upper left corner is like a temporary operation where we have some LNG trucks standing by. The lower left is where you could make a permanent facility where you have, and just to give you a picture, these are just ideas, where you have some bullet tanks, if you will. We're not talking a big LNG storage tank like you'd have in Providence, but some smaller tanks, such that you'd see in this kind of picture as an example, with some bullet tanks that we could store LNG there as a permanent. Another option we're considering is a barge, an LNG barge. This would be the first application of this for distribution purposes in the US. Now, there are LNG barges that are currently operating to provide LNG to shipping. We have had some of our subject matter experts have worked on a lot of these types of operations, and down off of in Florida right now in Jacksonville, there's actually this sort of barge operation. And what we'd bring in, and this barge is not like a big tanker ship. It's a small barge, like you see a picture there of, and I know I apologize, you can't probably tell the scale, but it's a barge we'd bring in for the winter. It'd be parked a couple miles offshore on the ocean side of the island, not the bay side. So we're not going to go under the bridge or anything like that. But this barge would park offshore for the winter, and it would take its LNG that's stored on the barge, and it would vaporize it. So it would inject natural gas into an underwater pipe that would come right into our take station or near our take station at some point in Portsmouth there, and inject into the island as needed. So that's another option that's on the table for consideration. I will say one other thing we want to highlight. If we were to move forward with a temporary or portable or permanent LNG site on Navy property, it introduces the option to look at using hydrogen, a completely clean, a much more cleaner, decarbonized option where you'd take water, you electrify it with hopefully renewable energy, and you separate the hydrogen molecules out of that water, and you can inject that into your gas system. And doing such an application will be the first in the U.S. This type of injection or blending of hydrogen into natural gas systems is done in Europe, but it would be the first in the U.S. to do such an application. There are hydrogen networks in the U.S., but not a blended type of application where we're injecting it into our methane-based natural gas system, if you will. But we predict that you can inject about 20% of the makeup of your natural gas being 20% hydrogen into the system. So that 20% margin really enables cover the gaps, if you will. And it's again a decarbonized approach, and a lot of interest in using that. And Rhode Island's been first in hallmark for the first offshore wind farm in the U.S., right? Why not us be also the first to have hydrogen blending in our natural gas system? So that option is available if we were to pursue, a new site on Navy property. The third is a new pipeline to the island, and this is just replicating, if you will, our current, or reinforcing is in terms we use in our industry. Essentially putting another pipe to the island as both as additional supply capacity and contingency, and how that would come to be would be a close effort with, we don't own the transmission pipe. So in our study, I should highlight, we made projections of what this would entail as far as timeline, costs, and so forth. But ultimately, this would be a pipeline that Enbridge would install. They would have to sanction the project overall. And there is interest in sharing the cost of such a project with Massachusetts, because Massachusetts has some constraining areas as well, like on Cape Cod. So if there was interest in Massachusetts as well of putting, another pipeline in the region that would help Aquidneck Island, it could also help neighboring elements as well, which would help with some of the cost sharing overall. That's the pipeline project option. And then finally, as I said, the kind of status quo, if we had to, is just keeping a continued winter operation at Old Mill Lane. And naturally, and our study looked at a time horizon of 15 years. Certainly, we'd hope in that time frame other, mechanisms and other energy solutions would come to be as well. But certainly, ensuring that we have a heating source with reliability, with contingency for both capacity and vulnerability, keeping Old Mill Lane operational every winter is an option on the table, certainly. All right, so just talking about, and now I'll kind of just share some comparisons of these solutions. And we did look at quite a bit of criteria overall. And you see here, the first line is, how many years will we need to operate out of Old Mill Lane to allow some of these other options to mature and to become operational, if you will, and impact the overall use of natural gas or heating source on the island. If we would pursue the non-infrastructure alone, we predict it would take another 10 to 12 years of operation at Old Mill Lane. It's going to take that sort of time frame to convert 9,000 customers over to electric heat pumps, if you will. The next option, putting in a new LNG facility. So for example, if we were to site a new location on Navy property, we're talking a couple more years of operation at Old Mill Lane, 2 to 3 time frame of winters, because we do have to build the site, and we also have to build a pipeline to connect the site to our high pressure main. So we have miles of pipe to put in, a few miles of pipe to put in to do that. And it's going to take us a couple construction seasons to finalize all that. The next option, a new transmission pipeline. We're looking out to 28, 29 of continued use at Old Mill Lane before that pipeline would be operational, if you will. And then finally, obviously, if we kept operation at Old Mill Lane, then it's kind of negligible. We would continue to operate at Old Mill Lane, definitely, if we pursued that option. So I'm going to jump to kind of a summary of different evaluations. We did, as I mentioned previous, we looked at cost, reliability, we've looked at community impact, we've looked at environmental impact, we've looked at feasibility, and a lot of this detail is, throughout our study. You can really get into the nuts and bolts of it all, but this kind of summarizes some of the comparisons within each option. And I will say, a couple highlights here. Obviously, the non-infrastructure option is the most. By the way, the most these they're called Harvey balls, or these circles. The more shaded they are, the more favorable they are in comparison to the others. So the most favorable option from an environmental perspective would be the non-infrastructure option. Of course, it would be, right? The most, I'll call it, favorable option from a reliability perspective, we're jumping over to the pipeline. And when we talk about reliability here, this is for comparison purposes. Of course, all of them are reliable, but naturally, when you talk about trucking LNG, they're susceptible to traffic and weather conditions and that sort of thing. So there are some differences in reliability. You put a pipeline in the ground that's not subject to weather impacts, like an LNG truck might be, for example. Cost-wise, the most favorable option is just continuing to operate at Old Mill Lane. That's and we're going to get into the cost, because I know that's a big driver for a lot of folks on another slide here. But I just wanted to kind of paint this overall picture of where things land. And it's hard to, there's pros and cons with each, and we've seen it in the feedback that we've heard. Folks who favor the most affordable option prefer just, hey, keep operating at Old Mill Lane. Folks that think their reliability is most important, and some people have voiced very strong opinions for the new pipeline, which we know in the industry, getting new pipelines, a new transmission pipeline, is very challenging from a I'll call it just opposition viewpoint and putting that type of infrastructure in. But again, the reliability is the greatest. You look at the kind of middle ground, what provides a little bit of mix of each is some of the new LNG options that we provide. And then, of course, the most environmentally conscious one would be the non-infrastructure solution. But let me just show a little bit of slide. I only have a couple more slides here, and then we'll open it up for questions. Cost comparison. Now, I first want to highlight our study highlights there are different ways to assess costs. And I want to make sure it's clear, because there has been a lot of discussion on the non-infrastructure option, and that we don't take into account, I'll call it, societal benefits and costs. And there is a cost analysis that we use. We call it the Rhode Island test for our energy efficiency programs, which brings in a lot of those society benefits, the monetization of greenhouse gas reductions and the like. So that absolutely is highlighted in a report. So I want to be very clear. We're not trying to hide or skirt those impacts to costs for certain scenarios. But what we presented here was an apples to apples comparison of what the costs are for the utility from a net present value, which ultimately would be borne onto our customers. So this is what we believe is the cleanest way to present the cost comparisons. But again, If you want to look at alternative mechanisms of looking at costs, you should look at our study, as we do have a couple other profiles of cost implications overall. But in this net present value and in the 15-year time frame of what this study oversaw, you can see where the costs sort of lay out. And the Old Mill Lane options, obviously, that are the cheapest overall on one end, and the most expensive option is the non-infrastructure option. And that's because of the cost to incentivize and deploy such a program. And because it would take so long to fill the margin, if you will, you're going to still operate Old Mill Lane for another 10 to 12 years. So those costs at Old Mill Lane, on top of all the infrastructure elements that would have to put in place, is why that becomes the most expensive. The new pipeline, transmission pipeline, it's up there in cost. But then you get into kind of the middle ground here, and you're looking at the new LNG sites, and there's a variety of subtle differences in the cost. The barge, we believe, is a little more affordable because you don't have to build as much of the infrastructure involved, and it's we'd buy and own a barge type of operation, and again, it just comes in a slightly under cost compared to a new site on land, if you will. But that's how all the costs lay out. And again, these costs ultimately would be formalized in a recommendation we would take. So National Grid is looking to make a proposal to our regulator, and ultimately the cost would fall onto all of the customers of the entire state. Okay, so that would be shared through future rate filings or through different filing mechanisms that we have. And I won't bore you with all the acronyms on that, but if you want to know which filing mechanism would apply to which type of solution, I can certainly provide that detail as appropriate. So at the end of the day, that's kind of the scenarios, and what we're really here for, what I'm selfishly here for, is to share this information and get your feedback, to let us know what you think. And we've had now our Aquidneck site available for a few months now. We had an open house in October. We've had different stakeholder engagements with different state agencies, the Office of Energy Resources, obviously the division. We've met with legislators. We've met with advocacy groups, environmental and customer advocacy groups. So we've met with the other town councils. And as Joe knows, this material was also presented in early September at our Aquidneck Advisory Group. So we've tried to share this study to the maximum degree as we could. We looked for people to provide feedback via our website, and we have gotten some, but I'll tell you, it hasn't been as large as we were hoping. So, and honestly, the feedback thus far has been, I'll call it, inconclusive. As we feared, everybody who has their opinion about one option has been very clear about that option, but it's been scattered. So there's been support for, I'll call it, all of the options, except for there's one clear one, is get out of Old Mill Lane. So that's been a very loud and clear message that we've heard, is do what we can to try to minimize our continued operation out of Old Mill Lane. So if I were to say with pretty much utmost certainty, that's been received very loudly from the communities. Try to mitigate the operation of Old Mill Lane as much as possible. So with that, this feedback, we have a website at nationalgrid.com/Aquidneck. By the way, on this website, we also have a recording of our open house. We have all the questions and answers all the questions that were asked during our open house with answers available on the site that you can review. But we encourage both the public, community leaders, and anyone to submit a form on via our website. So we are going to be synthesizing all that feedback. Naturally, we'll protect we're not publishing what people say to the public, but we are going to be sharing that feedback, obviously, with our regulator when it comes time to propose a solution. We're looking for feedback in short order. We're looking to make a recommendation in December. So unfortunately, I know this town council it's actually my last major stakeholder engagement meeting, which only leaves you a few more weeks before we're really looking to try to tie up our recommendation. But that being said, I hope and encourage there will be questions and a viewpoint overall. And with that, I think I will try to stop sharing and just look to answer questions.
Thank you, Brian. I know that the council probably has a ton of questions, so we're gonna just use the raise hand function on Zoom to go through. But I did just want to ask before we get into it really, could you go into just in a little bit more detail? I want to understand more how you guys at Grid are going to make the decision for what you want to recommend to the PUC, and then what you want to what the actual approval process would look like.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we were hoping with this effort, you know, we're trying to this transparency of an approach. You know, we've never done this before. You know, we're coming out with all the cards and just saying, you know, folks, these are the options that we believe are viable and enduring and feasible and are safe and reliable and so forth. But we can go, we don't care. We'll take A, B, or C, or D. So we've shared this kind of approach with the division overall about, you know, we want the voice of the community to really play into our decision overall. So we're hoping the voice of both all of our, you know, stakeholders and community members is, you know, comes out to be a little louder for one option. That makes it easier for us. But right now, like I said, we've been at this for a couple months, and the margins between what I'll call votes in, if you will, feedback it's inconclusive. So, you know, it's going to make our decision of how we approach this very difficult. But that being said, we are taking into account, you know, this may not be the best way, but what's the option that seems to have the least resistance, if you will, or might scratch the itch of all of them to a certain degree, or more importantly, could we pursue a couple options and keep optionality on the table? And honestly, because there's so much interest in a couple different options, we may, you know, look into the next year of pursuing a couple options and keeping those on the table, so to speak, and letting them mature further before we narrow in on sort of the final or what would be the enduring solution. So, and the process is, you know, based on the type of solution. So if it's an infrastructure solution that requires, you know, capital investment, we have a filing process annually with our regulator. It's called the ISR, Infrastructure Safety and Reliability filing, that we have each year. We propose to the division and ultimately to the PUC, this is how much money we'd like to spend on this option, and they review it and rule on it. They approve it, if you will, or they deny it, because it ultimately that approval goes into rates, you know, so it impacts the customer's bill ultimately. If it's a non-infrastructure type solution, we have a different type of mechanism, but it's very simpler. It falls under the what we call the SRP process, but it's very similar. We'd make a motion to the regulator. They would approve it or disapprove it, and then we go forward and implement as appropriate. So the time frame, these are annual. At least the ISR process is an annual process. So we could propose, you know, we want to pursue these two options, but we're only going to suggest a certain threshold of funding for this upcoming year. And then next year, you know, we may figure out what we get with more research and study and analysis. We may be able to pursue another option with more finality, if you will. So, you know, that could be one of the approaches that we take come December. By the way, the filing with the PUC for that capital infrastructure is due at the end of the calendar year. So we got to file our case. So we're formulating it now. That's why we kind of want feedback by December 1st overall. So we have the month of December to finish up our formalities, if you will, on the overall approach, and make sure we get our filing in by the end of December. So then the PUC has their review period and makes a ruling on it by the end of March.
Thank you, Brian. And so I do also want to note that there are some folks in the audience who want to ask questions. There's going to be questions from the council and discussion on the council first, and then we can have audience input. So Councilor Leonard. Councilor Leonard, you have to unmute.
Thank you, Brian. We appreciate your presentation. I want to say that during the gas outage, and really always, I personally appreciate all of the feedback and responses that I receive from personnel from National Grid. They've been very helpful about that, and
Thank you.
I appreciate that. I have a few things that I've been asked over and over, and maybe you can answer those, and I think it would help the public to give you more feedback, so to speak. One thing we're asked all the time is, in the final investigation of the gas outage last year, was that no one ever saw a final public announcement of why. Some people speculated that there was a short supply. Others thought that the Algonquin or one of the feeding stations wasn't working properly. But my first question is, can you do a quick summary so that people will try to understand? Because they always ask the question, and I can't myself give an answer because I never saw it.
I appreciate the question. There is a formal, there was a formal investigation done, and that investigation has been published formally. Unfortunately, and it does point to a few indicating causal factors, which are highlighted in that. So I guess the best I can do is refer you to that investigation report. I'm unfortunately, I can't comment or on behalf of National Grid. We are still in some litigation matters with regard to that finding overall. So I can't publicly discuss the findings overall and what we're specifically doing about it at this time, unfortunately.
Where do people find that report?
Just type in Aquidneck Island gas outage investigation report on your Google, and I'm sure it'll pop up. Unless Jock, do you know the exact report name of that? I apologize, I don't have it on top of my head.
I can get that to Kate.
Oh, text it to me. Thank you. You're always great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And next one.
You bet.
Some people ask me this question, and I didn't seem plausible to me, but I'll ask it anyway. Because Newport has either old pipeline, and I'm not saying it does, I'm just saying what I hear. Is it a concern that we lose the natural gas because of the old infrastructure, and that I didn't think that would be safe if it were true, but I've asked that. I don't have the answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, and we, so I would say there isn't a concern there. We do have a very aggressive, proactive, we call it a leak-prone pipe replacement program, where we go in and upgrade piping. It's happening as you speak in Newport. And so those projects are enduring and ongoing, where we replace older infrastructure with new pipe to ensure, that reliability and safety. Do we have a concern about them, rupturing? No, that's not on the table. It's the concern and the challenges that I highlighted are more the supply and the supply vulnerability. So that coming from our transmission provider, do we have enough supply coming onto the island to meet the demand? And then secondly, what if there's an interruption in that supply, like happened in January 2019? If there's an interruption to that and we lose pressure and we now have an outage, what do we have as a backup? What do you have as a contingency?
Right.
Those are the concerns. But the piping itself, we have a very robust program to ensure we stay on top of that.
Okay, now I also hear, and I think you're not going to find one doubter, that we definitely need greater supply. And how we get there is what you're all investigating, so we appreciate that. One of the things that people have said in the past is, or that people got nervous with barges or with tankers going in. That one, I would guess, from people I talk to, is the greatest concern. So I'll just put that out as feedback.
And thank you for that. That's the kind of stuff we want to hear. And I'll be honest, we've heard that from a few key stakeholders about the barge being, not going to happen. You're going to get too much opposition. So the more we hear that, the better, the more that helps our, formulate our approach.
Okay, then
And
another.
again, we're not talking a tanker. We're not talking big LNG tankers. This is
a barge.
A barge, right? That would get pulled in with a tug and sit offshore. It would be moored offshore, and it could be pulled away at any time. It could be pulled away during if a hurricane came or something. We could disengage it, take it away, that sort of thing. It's offshore, so it doesn't, the noise and the concerns that people have with a facility on land near residential neighborhoods like we have at Old Mill Lane, that goes away if it's offshore. But again, you're right. We know there are some very big concerns about having any sort of operation offshore.
Okay, another thing people ask is that National Grid worked hard and for the right reasons to transition people from electric to natural gas, which was a huge savings for many, many residents, and they've all recognized that. So now we're talking about maybe the future of using heat pumps. And one of the things that I've recognized, and I'm saying it publicly because RISE, Rhode Island Saves Energy, one of the things that they recommend is to have, if you have an electric water heater, to consider getting a hybrid water heater that in fact works with the heat pump, which is a substantial savings to people. I did it in my house, so I'm saying it publicly that there's a big rebate from RISE for that. So I think that encourages people for savings that way, not only in cost, but in energy for the fact that we have less, our supply may be endangered. So that I think is something that during COVID, I have to say that RISE, working together with National Grid, has really done a lot to help people because they've had the no copay. So that's a public thing I think needs to be done. And I guess the last question, and I'll leave you in peace, is that people, and I know the answer, but I think the public would want to hear it one more time. All costs incurred by improvements or to the pipelines or any improvements to the system, those costs go to the distribution side of the bill rather than the transmission side. Is that correct?
All that we do within our filing mechanisms, correct? Yeah, those with yes. So that
some states again, don't do that though. We're told that other states it doesn't go all to the distribution side, that it also goes to the transmission side for improvements to infrastructure. So transmission, if there was a new transmission pipe, those costs would still go ultimately to the same customer. It's just under a different mechanism, if you will. So I guess what I'm talking about, for our distribution improvements that we file through the ISR that I talked about. So for example, when we replace and upgrade our gas pipes with new pipe, that goes into our infrastructure safety and reliability filing every year, and that goes into the distribution charges, if you will. But there would be the cost for transmission upgrades still go to the customers that use those use natural gas. Oh yeah. But other states do it differently, no? At least that's what I'm told.
Again, at the end of the day, the folks who are going to be using and benefiting from that asset improvement are the ones who are going to be paying for it. So yeah, the cost for a new pipeline would be ultimately borne onto the ratepayers of Rhode Island.
Right. And finally, I would like to personally say on behalf of many, many residents, thank you to Jacques Alfonso, because he's always responsive to people, and being a public utility, people appreciate that. And it's nice that you all came to this meeting and give us, more opportunity to speak. So I appreciate that.
I sincerely thank you for that feedback. Jacques, one of our best. Absolutely.
He is.
So I have no question there. And we, of course, want to make sure we try to be as transparent as we can and open and work together. We always want a collaborative solution. And at the end of the day, like I've highlighted, trying to make sure we have a safe, reliable, affordable option and for the enduring future of the island, which allows, and I think you touched on this a little bit, which allows for continued growth and development. I mean, there are some folks who have mentioned the word moratorium. You know, we should just put a moratorium on gas, right? And you know, there are advocates for that, right? But right, and that doesn't really solve our challenge, because we still have, for the existing natural gas customers, we still have a vulnerability situation. We need something to solve for that. And alternatively, a moratorium on natural gas would just mean they go to other, you know, cheaper options, which may not be carbon friendly, right?
Correct.
So yeah, a moratorium, we don't believe is the right approach forward, but that's something that each community would have to consider.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
You bet. Thank you. Great feedback.
Thank you. Councilor McCalla.
Hi, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Jock, for being here. This was a really informative presentation, and I'm super grateful that you're here. I just have a couple of questions that I wanted to just kind of talk about. So I was able to read, you know, the 75-page report that was drafted, and trying to get some contextualization. Also, I should let you know that I am the one of the council liaisons to the Energies and Environments Commission. And so I've done a lot of research in regards to just educating myself more in terms of environmental friendly, you know, situations. And one of the things that I've learned that is truly impactful is the north end in terms of like equity. So the north end of Newport, and I'm just saying the boundary wise, like not the, you know, literally struggles in terms of health conditions. They tend to be the most susceptible in comparison to the rest of Newport in regards to pre-existing health conditions. And so like the things that I'm a little worried about is a few things. Like one of the things that I had learned is, you know, when we think about gas and their, you know, the carbon footprint that kind of goes into it, that seems to be a really big issue. I know that gas cooking, what I learned too, in specific, actually, there's lots of research to suggest that there has been an increase in respiratory disease, as well as cardiovascular disease, premature deaths. We know that children are most vulnerable, and especially in specific low-income children, to, you know, conditions by this. And then also understanding too, that there's been lots of talk in regards to like cleaner solutions. And so one of the things that I really was kind of happy to hear was your presentation in regards to electrification as well as heat pumps. I know in terms of the North End Urban Development Plan, as well, like as well as our comprehensive land use plan, suggests a cleaner, greener way of moving forward. And so I guess that's kind of like what I'm thinking. And then I guess like my interpretation of what happened of the gas outage crisis was that it was something that was more mechanical and not necessarily something that was associated with a supply issue. So I'm just kind of like concerned about like, how did this kind of come about when it was a mechanical issue, not necessarily that we didn't have enough gas?
Yeah, so a mechanical issue, we'll just say for
I'm being very general. Yep.
An interruption on the gas pipeline, whatever cause it may have caused that, right over. There's an interruption into the supply, so the supply is not coming in, and of course, as probably you all know, Aquidneck Island is at the end of the pipe. So the lowest pressures are going to be felt at the end of the pipe if there's an upstream interruption of whatever might be that interruption. And therefore the supply, if there's an upstream interruption, the supply to the downstream customers are going to be felt first. And that's exactly what happened January 2019. So that's what I mean by supply, is that you've had an interruption to your supply. Now, capacity wise, say there's no interruption.
Before you move into capacity, I'm just wondering, how will you determine the supply needs in the future?
And we have that in our study. So there are several different, we have a kind of high, low, medium assessments on demand. So a lot of that has to do with growth and demand and increases. And so we do have analysis that we have very detailed within the study, and we put projections on for both a high growth profile or a low profile. We even imply, we put in variables for COVID impacts. So the lowest demand profile actually dips the demand for a while because of COVID overall, and the decreased usage potentially from COVID related impacts. So there's a lot of different variables analysis, but those demand profile curves are in the study. And if you want more details on that, happy to get you the right subject matter expert if you really want to went behind the analysis that went behind those demand profile curves. But I can just say, in general speaking, we look at growth and economic development overall regionally. We see